What's going on, people? Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to KGX to the Z TV. Here today with a little midweek transfer roundup, Chelsea style, right? We know we're getting close to the end of the window. Still got a lot of players on the books that we need to make decisions on. So what better place to talk about those decisions and to talk about those players? And I'm going to bring up a tweet that I saw earlier. And this just sort of lists some of the players at the beginning of the day that we still need to decide on, right? Whether it's the long-term future, aka getting sold, or whether it's the short-term future, in the sense of Kepa, players like Kepa with loans, right? So obviously the big news out of today, besides the Osherman chat, the Lukaku deal looks like it's getting ready to be finalized. Kepa looks like we exercised a 1-year extension and then sent him out on loan to Bournemouth. So hopefully, I guess the board was kind of looking at it from the standpoint of we aren't too many suitors in terms of purchasing him outright, but we send him out on loan. Hopefully he has a decent year. Did feature a lot last year for Madrid. Obviously they didn't want him. Although potentially they were kind of kicking the tires a little bit or expressing interest just based off of the uncertainty with what was going to happen with Lunin. But it looks like Lunin's going to stay and deputize for Courtois, and their keeper situation is settled. So going to Bournemouth, so we could see him potentially get a lot of minutes for them in the Premier League. I actually wouldn't mind Chelsea waiving the clause where loan players can't play against their parent club. I think a lot of folks would rather like to see us put some past Kepa for all the misery and all the headaches that he's caused us over the years. Most of it fault of our own, right? For making him the biggest or highest keeper transfer of all time. But yeah, let's get into it because it's a long list, right? So we'll start and kind of keep on the theme of keepers, right? So first on that list, as you can see, is Petrovic. Petrovic came in last year, supposed to be the number 2. Sanchez did what Sanchez does and looked shaky. And Pochettino ultimately ended up making the move to Petrovic, and then Sanchez went the other way in terms of being the cup keeper. And things were looking pretty good for Petrovic, right? Fairly solid. There's a few blunders here and there in terms of saves and issues with his hands, but fairly consistent, fairly confident in when he was between the posts in terms of no real bozo moments. Obviously, he is not the best with his feet, so immediately when Maresca was brought in and the idea of playing a possession-based approach, playing out from the back, which was what we wanted to do last year with Sanchez, but obviously he proved and has continued to prove that he is not capable of doing that. But yeah, that is Petrovic's weakest area. So with that being said, he is one of the players that we need to make a decision on. Since we brought in Jorgensen, looks like Jorgensen is going to be the cup keeper / conference league keeper until things change, right? Maresca came out recently and said Sanchez is his number 1, but as you can see, a lot of things, or as we can kind of tell from experience, a lot of things change over the course of a season, and injuries happen, form happens. So wouldn't be surprised at all if we saw Jorgensen and Sanchez sort of swap roles, and one go to the Conference League, assuming we get past Serviette on Thursday, and then one being the cup keeper and things like that. So with that being said, there's no room in there for Petrovic, which I wouldn't have minded him being our number 2 with Sanchez being our number 3. But obviously you don't want a keeper like Petrovic who could go out on loan, has Premier League experience, rumored that potentially going to Strasbourg, but that would eat up one of the 6 international loan spots. So it's going to be tricky in terms of what we do with Petrovic. Ideally, would love to see him be loaned to a Premier League side, But realistically, as we go down the window or get closer to the deadline date, potentially a loan in the championship or an outright sale. So, a lot of options and a lot of decisions to make on Petrovic and whether or not he has a future with this club. As you can tell, or you've seen with the Sky Sports graphics and all those kind of things, we have no shortage of keepers. And Petrovic is one that folks have seen, folks know what he's about, but he's more of a traditional keeper, right? Not as good with the ball at his feet. So that will definitely limit some of the interest, but I still believe that there's probably some suitors around Europe, as well as in England for his services. So definitely a player that he's not going to be able to stay. We've got to make a decision on him whether or not we want to sell him or keep him, and loan him out, potentially try to raise his value with some good performances and then move on. Chalobah. So Chalobah's part of the Boo team, the Banish team. What's interesting with Chalobah is with some of the question marks regarding our center backs in terms of who the ideal partnership is, what the cover is, right? We've seen Fofana and Colwill start in the league. We've seen Badiashile and Tosin start in the Conference League. But ideally, you really would want a fifth choice center back, and right now that fifth choice center back is Disasi. But should things fall through with Guéhi to Newcastle, and Newcastle do end up going for Disasi, then we could see an option of, do we get rid of both of them? Do we get rid of Disasi and sell Chalobah, or vice versa? Do we get rid of Chalobah, which we know will be pure profit, and keep Disasi? Gun to my head, if I had to pick one to choose, I would definitely keep Chalobah. I think he's a little bit more versatile. I think Disasi might be better in a back four versus certain teams that are physical, good in the air. But I think Chalobah is better he can play in a back three. He can deputize at right back a little bit more. He can even move up a little bit, and he's shown in the past, not so much for Chelsea, but for some of the teams that he was loaned out with, that he can play in that center defensive mid role should we need him in a pinch trying to lock down a game. And with our lack of options in terms of bodies behind Caicedo and Lavia as our true holding midfielders, sixes, it would be nice to have a player of that ilk, and that kind of variety and flexibility. So my personal opinion would be to keep Chalobah, but I also wouldn't be really upset if we let go either him, Disasi, or both. If we let both go, I think we definitely would need a fifth center back to come in as just cover, considering Fofana's injury history, considering Colwell's knocks from last year, and so forth. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Rumor has it that Palace, if Palace gets rid of, say, Guéhi does go to Newcastle, Palace has already got rid of Anderson. Does that mean Palace come in for a center back? And if they do, would they want Disasi or would they want Chalobah? I think they would probably want Chalobah, a little bit more mobile, a little bit better on the ball, but some interesting dynamics and some outside factors that are going to have to kind of give us a little domino effect in order for one or more of those guys to move. So with those two kind of futures really, really up in the air this week, you got to look at the vice captain or former vice captain, Ben Chilwell, right? Played one game in the preseason. Maresca came out and said, yeah, you know what? He's not my type of fullback, right? Not the kind of fullback that we want for our system. He's injury prone. He's around 28, so he's approaching an age where fullbacks start to lose their physical characteristics and traits. And considering that Ben Chilwell's best attribute is his overlap, is his robustness on the left-hand side in terms of getting down that wing, whipping balls in and things like that, which we've seen when he's healthy, that he's very capable of it. But the problem is he neither fits the system that Maresca wants to play, nor is he very consistently available. So you factor those two kind of those two into the equation, and then you throw in on top he's on 200K a week, and we need to find a solution for Ben Chilwell. And it's been pretty quiet. I know there's been some Man United rumors in terms of Sancho coming our way, and then Sterling and maybe Chilwell going. I can't see United making a move, maybe the old United, but I can't see Ineos and Sir Jim making a move for another aging, injury-prone English left back when they already have the blueprint in Luke Shaw in that regard. But you never know. I mean, because Malassi is also coming off of a big injury, so you got to figure maybe if they have three of them, maybe one of them is fit, and you don't have to play Dallo or Maserati on their weaker side. So we'll see what happens with Chilwell. If an offer comes in, I would love to just get him off the books. I thought it was a huge mistake re-signing him, more so in the fact that just the major injuries that he was coming off of. But yeah, just not a player that's going to fit into us long term, and one where doesn't seem to be gaining or garnering a lot of interest. So we'll see what happens with Chilwell in the next week as well. Cesare Casadei, a player that Maresca is very familiar with, right? Had him last year on loan, first half of the season. Did feature a lot, right? Got a lot of minutes off the bench, started the odd cup matches, and as fixtures started to get congested, they always do in the championship, would start some odd games here and there. But then, for some strange reason, we recalled him in the second half of the season when he was having a successful loan in terms of the minutes he was playing on a side that was looking to get promoted and ultimately did get promoted. So came back to us second half of the season and probably played 2 or 3 matches, didn't do too much, didn't show too much in preseason. Sort of an awkward fit, right? You look at him and he's not really a holding midfielder. He's more of a 10, sort of someone you want to get around the box because he's pretty good in the air. But other than that, you don't know too much about his game, right? You've seen bits and pieces here and there. He's not a dribbler. He's not overly athletic. So he's definitely a player that was an interesting buy when we got him, but the profile wasn't too bad, right? He was a young Italy international, good height, good size, good physicality, adapted to the championship fairly well. Can score the goal here, the odd goal here and there, but a player that potentially could be thrown in to help reduce the fee should we actually go for Osimhen, right? Because we know him being Italian, he probably wouldn't have too many reservations going back to Serie A for his long-term exposure, his long-term growth. Probably a better fit for him there than here. If he did stay with us, I would love for him just to go out on another loan, maybe to the championship. That way he can get guaranteed minutes, work on his game, work on his development. But I would be very surprised if he was still with us after the transfer window. And if he is, he's going to be playing, excuse me, in the U21s reserves, and getting, maybe the odd call up here and there should injuries hit in like a cup match or something like that, just to kind of fill the bench out. But next one is a very interesting one, and one that will probably divide a lot of opinions amongst the fan base, right? Carney Chukwuemeka, right? We've seen what Carney could do. We remember the goal last year versus Liverpool, the quick shift, slotted it home. But unfortunately for Carney, just can't stay fit, right? 2 years of being available for a week, 2 weeks, and then being injured and not being available for 3 to 4 weeks, right? Continuing to undergo his rehabilitation program and all those things. He's a player that, honestly, I would have loved to see more minutes at that 8 position, right? I know we've got a lot of players that can play there, but when I look at him and I look at the attributes that he brings, I see someone that he might not be better than Dewsbury Hall right now, in terms of Dewsbury Hall is more experienced, a little bit stronger, available, but a player that has attributes that KDH doesn't have, right? He can dribble, he's physical, he's got a decent eye for a goal, he's got a nice physical stature about him. He's not the physical specimen that Loftus-Cheek is or was, but he's got some similar qualities in terms of his ability to carry the ball and his ability to be strong and not be pushed off the ball at a young age. But again, the injury concerns. I loved when we brought him in from Villa, I think around 14, 15 million, because he just seemed like a player that, if given minutes to develop and given time, could really develop into a really, really good player. And unfortunately, injuries have just derailed him. So he's also a player though that he's got a little bit of a name around him and a little bit of a buzz around him. And should we put him up on the market, whether that be for a loan, which a loan would he would definitely be up for, like a Premier League type loan, or a potential sale, right? I mean, you look at, like I said, you look at his qualities, you look at his attributes, you look at his age profile, and he's a player that would definitely have suitors in this league. He's homegrown. He's like I mentioned before, he can play at 8, he can play at the 10. He probably can do a little bit of a decent job as like an inside forward. So he's a very, very talented young player. But again, just the availability is the major concern. And if he could get that right and get minutes for him to develop, he could be a very important player, not only for us, but for another team. So he's a player that I would definitely, um, I would be a little bit upset if we lost him. But if the price was right, I would definitely let him go just based off of his injury concerns and some of the other players that we have in that position, even though I still think he's a better long-term fit in that like kind of advanced 8, compared to KDH. But Kellyman, right? So I watched him a little bit last week in the U21 games. He looks like a very, very interesting player, right? He came to us in the shady Matson deal where we let Matson go to Villa, and then we ended up buying this guy whose book value is like 1-2 million, for like we bought him for like 18, 19 million, right? So right there kind of killed some of the funds with the Matson deal. But he is a player that's got a very unique profile, right? Like I mentioned, I watched him the other day, and I'll definitely keep my eye on him because I think he's going to stay with us, but be a part of the U21, partly because he was injured in the preseason and he might just not have enough time to get suitors to find somebody for him. But also, he does need a lot of physical development. He's very lanky, very tall. He does have a very good left foot and the ability to sort of, he's not pacey, but because he's tall and he's got long strides, he has the ability to like take the ball past somebody and drive at the defense and things like that. But I have noticed shooting wise, his shot power is very, very, very weak, right? He's not a very clean striker of the ball, but he's young. He's got time to develop, so we'll see. But ultimately, I think he'll play with the U23s or U21s. Angelo, another player that is one that has the ability to beat a man, right? He's got that Brazilian flair about him. When he gets the ball, you look at him and, like I mentioned before on one of my previous videos, gives you a little bit of Douglas Costa vibes. Not as explosive in terms of pace, but definitely shifty. Can definitely beat the first man, and things like that. Last year, spent the year on loan at Strasbourg and got some decent minutes there for his first full campaign in Europe. But he's definitely a player that I've seen rumored for him to go back out on loan to Strasbourg or to also to be sold. I wouldn't necessarily be against moving him on if a 10, $15 million, 20 million pound move came in for him. But I also don't think too many folks would be beating down the door for an 18-year-old that they know is surplus to requirements, considering we've got Madueke, Palmer, Neto can play there on that right wing. You've got guys coming in like Pais next year, as well as Esteval. So it's not going to work out for all these guys, right? So someone's got to go, and unfortunately, it'll probably be Angelo if he can get a decent move this year, kind of raises his Q value a little bit, and then ultimately get sold. But yeah, he's definitely a player that I think will either get loaned or get sold outright. Raheem Sterling. Whew, this is an interesting one, right? So we've seen all the chat today and the talks about Ornstein, Fabrizio, about Chelsea and United are exploring a move. Chelsea sends them Sterling. They send us in return Sancho. Whew, interesting, right? I like most Chelsea fans would love to get Sterling off the books, right? 300K a week, the kind of production he brings. Although last year 8 goals, I think 4 assists in the league, so not terrible. But we know a player like Sterling, and we saw how those 8 goals and 4 assists came, and they could have been a lot better. But do you want to bring a player like Sancho who has shown that he's got some big risk, right? He's got questions about whether or not he can hack it physically in this league. He's got questions about whether or not his attitude is there and his the mental side of his game is there. So big questions on Sancho. Is it a Ten Hag issue? Is it an issue with him just not putting his head down and training? Is it an issue with him just not being physically prepared for this league? So there's just a lot of questions about Sancho and a lot of risk about him. Not only that, but he's also on 250K a week. So whether or not he would take a cut to come into price cut to come kind of into our new wage structure is definitely a concern. But then also, he's not a true winger, right? He's someone that is more of an inside forward, and we just brought in a Jaden Sancho. I mean, I'm sorry, a João Felix. We've got Palmer. We've got Nkuku who can play there. Enzo's played there. Dewsbury Halls can play there. So he's a player that, don't get me wrong, I rate him higher than Dewsbury Hall in that position. Definitely rate him higher than Enzo in that position. And he's probably on par up there with Felix in terms of high potential, low return on investment so far at this point in his career. But if we brought him in, does that mean what does that mean with Mudryk? Does Mudryk get left out of the squad? Does he go out on loan? Does he get sold? Wouldn't be opposed to any of those things. But if we did bring in a winger, I would prefer somebody that is more of a Mudryk, more of a Pedro Neto profile than a João Felix or Jadon Sancho profile, right? Someone who's a little bit better behind the striker. Although if you look at Sancho's best qualities, his link up play, his interchange, his quick feet, his quick mind, you pair him with players like Jackson, with players like Cole Palmer and Cuckoo, Felix, Enzo, and you could see the intrigue there. But again, that's just a lot of bodies to manage in those positions and a lot of ego and a lot of question marks, right? So definitely something that again will divide the fan base, whether or not we get him. But it's really up to both players, right? Because it's both players have to reduce their wages. Both players want to play. For the case of Sancho and Sterling, maybe they want looking at late runs at the 2026 World Cup, trying to get back into the England side for Sancho as well as for Sterling. So it really depends on their careers and how they see the immediate future playing out for them and what do they want to do, right? Even with Sancho, we know the manager doesn't rate him. Ten Hag. Is Ten Hag going to be there past December, past January? Should the results kind of stagnate or continue on what they were sort of putting out there and week in, week out last year in the Premier League? So it's definitely an interesting dynamic and something that Sancho and his team would have to definitely think about, right? Do you also you want to take with Palmer being on 120K, I can't see us offering Sancho anything more than 120K, right? Considering all that Palmer's done in the league as compared to Sancho. So again, would he want to reduce his wages by pretty much in half? A lot of question marks, a lot of things to be answered, and no shortage of rumors for the next week. So David Washington, another player that we bought last year and had no idea what to do with him, right? I think he was around like 18, 19, 20 million that we spent on him too. We did see him once or twice make the make the bench in the league. I think he even got a couple minutes in one of the Carabao Cup matches towards the end of the season. But other than that, he was playing strictly in the reserves team. He's a player that if you spend that kind of money on him, he needs to be playing not for our reserves, right? We don't any player unless they're coming back from injury or again like making their way back into the team. Any player that's we drop that kind of cash on does not need to be rotting away in the reserves, right? That is for youngsters, development kids, people getting their fitness back. Maybe David Washington needed it last year, but for that price, you would think that he would be able to come in and immediately get a pretty decent loan, right? Portugal, whether that was Strasbourg, somewhere, but basically this brother needs minutes and he needs them quickly because he's at an age where development is starting to his development will start to stagnate if he doesn't face better competition week in and week out. Whether or not he's good enough to do that, don't know. I have no idea because we just haven't seen too much of him, but we know that he needs to get out there and sort of prove himself and so we can kind of see what we have for him. Datro Fofana, another player striker that we brought last year. I think we bought him from Mold. Around 8 million, 7 million, 8 million. Immediately went out on loan to Union Berlin, fell out with the coach, got sent back in January, and then went back out on loan to Burnley for the second half of the season last year. And to be honest, there was a couple games where he played fairly well. And who knows if Burnley had would have stayed up, maybe if Company would have exercised a little bit more caution, maybe they would have looked to keep him and maybe Company would still be there and not in Bayern Munich. But all things happen for a reason. And Fofana was back with us, was rumored to go on loan, oh, excuse me, to Leicester. And then some other kind of lower tier Premier League sides sniffing around because he's not a bad player, right? You watch him, he's very He's very compact, he's very strong on the ball. He's not super pacey, but he's probably a better natural finisher than Jackson. And he's still very young. I think he's 20, 21. He think he's starting to be a Ivory Coast international. So his name is out there a little bit, but it's just whether or not you can get the right either loan for him or you can get the right sales fee for him. So, you know, anything that we could do to sort of turn a profit for him because it obviously looks like he's not part of the long-term plans. I actually wouldn't have minded him as opposed to the GUI for our backup striker. If you would have told me which one would I've rather had in the preseason without seeing Guy, I probably would have said Fofana. But after seeing Guy play, I'm like, all right, I see, I see some of his attributes. I see some of his potential. He's younger. And he was a very, very astute purchase too from Barcelona. So I can see why they chose to kept him instead. But yeah, he's definitely a player. If you can get anything 10, 12 million for him, let him go. Let him go. Broja, another one that supposedly fell through because of either his medical rumors about him picking up another injury in training. But he was on his way to Ipswich with a loan with a $30 million obligation to buy should they stay in the Premier League. Ipswich did go out and spend some cash on another striker, so that maybe that move was more ambitious and more sort of hearsay than actual concrete facts and things like that. But he's another player that his time here is done. He's a academy kid technically, so he's pure profit, but just never got back to the heights or showed the potential that he did before his bad knee injury, which is a shame because he was a very unique profile in this day and age, right? Strong, physical, back shoulder runner. Pretty decent loan at Southampton 2 years ago. Got some good experience. I think he had like 7 or 8 goals in the league, which is not too bad for at the time, like 19, 20-year-old striker, Albanian international. So he's definitely there's definitely a place for him at one of the lower Premier League sides or championship type, like a championship team that's got ambitions of getting promoted. So definitely a player that I would love for us to move on from, right? Just because I just don't see him ever being of the quality to threaten Jackson, to threaten a potential Oshiman, Ivan Toney, and things like that. So if you can get I always said if you can get anything above 10, 15 million for him, it's like you bite their hand off and let him go. Uh Gooey. Ooh, this one's interesting, right? Because ideally you would love to go into the season with a more experienced backup striker than Gooey, and then you would want someone who's more proficient in goal, considering some of Jackson's faults and some of the characteristics that he has. And Gooey's shown a lot of positive qualities, right? He's fearless, he's relentless, he's tireless. Um, Scored a decent header in the preseason, but we've also seen some of his shortcomings, right? He's not a player that has a lot of technical quality when it comes to linking the play and things like that. Part of that just because of his age and his inexperience. But we've also seen the poor finishing versus Servette, where he had a chance for not one chance but two chances to sort of get on the score sheet, and actually three, and fluffed it. Right, he had that one early and tried to head it when he skipped around the keeper, could have gone down, got a penalty, but he stayed on his feet, did the honest thing. And then of course that second half miss where he had a pretty much an open goal, open net, missed it, and then missed the rebound, and then missed the third rebound. So um his situation is dependent, fluid, right? If we bring in Oshiman, and we bring in a Tony, he's got to go out on loan, preferably probably back to Spain, if and maybe use one of those last international loan spots. But he's definitely a player that will have suitors for him. And I actually think the English game suits his physique well, suits his style well. But I would want him to get minutes, and I would want him to play. And if we brought in another striker, it's going to be that striker plus Jackson playing. So there wouldn't be a lot of opportunity for him, because you could potentially have Nkuku too as your third striker. We've seen Palmer play up there so far this year as a false nine. You could probably put Felix up there as a false nine. So he's definitely a player that we could potentially put out on loan. And I think I'd feel more comfortable with it than him being our backup striker. Bergstrom, probably will be maybe a third choice keeper. Him or uh, we still have Bettinelli. I mean, your third keeper is usually just somebody homegrown, usually somebody from the academy, because they just don't play too much, right? Unless you have a crazy injury crisis like Real Madrid did the last year when Courtois got hurt, and then they were juggling Kepa and Lunin. You just don't get too many third choice keepers getting a lot of minutes. So back to the reserves, potentially a loan, but either way, I mean, he's not going to be with the first team. Same with Matos, and same with Harvey Vale. Potentially maybe a better loan this year for Harvey Vale. He was in League One side last year, so maybe a championship side. He's also at that age, and like a lot of our old Chelsea loan army under Roman, where he just needs to get out there and find a permanent home, and just kind of make that home his, in terms of kind of establishing himself as a professional. So those last three: loans, reserves, sales. If you get anything for them, like I said, they're all homegrown, they're all pure profit, and neither one of them has any. I know Matos is featured once before in terms of the senior team, but all of them are players that don't seem to have a long-term future at Chelsea, or else they'd be knocking on the first team. None of them. Bergstrom might have traveled with us to the USA for the preseason tour, because we just didn't have keepers around. Ironically, even though we have got like 7 or 8, but yeah, those three guys, more than likely, we're probably going to move them on, or get them back in the reserves, and kind of develop them a little bit more, with the idea of pushing them out, in future years, and to help with the PSR and FFP books. So yeah, a lot of work for the board, a lot of work for the directors. 24/7, they're going to be on it. It's going to be some crazy rumors, some crazy links, a lot of here we goes from Fabrizio, hopefully with Chelsea players and Chelsea names. At this particular point in the season, and this particular point under Maresca, you'd probably want to see more outgoings than incomings, right? We've got to get some of these names off the books, reduce the wage bill. Potentially, if we're going to be looking at altering our wage structure to bring in the likes of an Oshiman or even a Tony. I imagine Tony would probably want something like 130, 140, 150K, considering he's an England international, his age, he's looking to get paid, and his what Saudi would technically pay him. So yeah, it'll be interesting, right? Got to bring the wage bill down, got to get some of these folks out, and get some of the kids out to help them develop. And then some of the more senior experienced players that we know that aren't long-term solutions or haven't shown anything in a Chelsea shirt. Looking at your Sterlings, looking at Fafanas, your Chilwells, Chilwell showed a lot at a Chelsea shirt to be fair to him, but your Disassis and folks like that where you could still command a pretty nice fee for, and then also potentially get those wages off the books and potentially free up a spot for, I don't know, maybe one or two more key first team signings. I'd still, if both of the center backs went out, I'd still love a Mark Gahey. I would still love one more like a wide winger. If we get rid of Sterling, and potentially wouldn't be opposed to bringing in a Tony. I think I'd rather have a Tony than an Oshman um, just based off of team chemistry, based off of the wages and things like that. I like Tony's physicality. I like his chippiness. Right, he's got a chip on his shoulder. He plays aggressive. His link up play is very solid. He's pretty available, minus the betting ban and things like that. So yeah, if I had my choice gun to my head, I would definitely bring him in. I wouldn't be opposed to an Oshman, especially if that sends if we get the price down, and we send Cesare Cassidy the other way, and he agrees to the wages. But that I think would be very, I think we're in a good position, right? Because we're pretty much only bidding against Saudi because PSG hasn't entered the race or technically entered the race. But yeah, a lot of big decisions. One thing with Chelsea is they're always going to surprise you. So we have no idea. I could wake up tomorrow morning and two of these guys on this list could be gone. We could have added some more folks. So here we go. Cheers to transfer deadline day. Coming up soon, we'll have the Servette match preview up before that. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But yeah, interesting times indeed. Make sure you stick around. Make sure you hit that like. Make sure you hit that subscribe. And I will see you for the next one. Peace.